Thank you for being here today, Brian.
Thank you for the reunion. I was looking forward to having a chat.
Awesome. So, could you tell us about yourself and your career?
Wow, I don't get to talk about myself very often. My background, I have a business degree and a law degree, both from the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. Was called to the bar as a lawyer in May of 1993. And was a lawyer officially, I think, for 14 hours, and had already taken a position with an investment bank, one that got acquired relatively quickly after I joined. It was a really good investment bank, focused on the majority was equities into medium-sized to small-cap Canadian companies, a lot of resource and materials companies, and some technology companies. And then they got acquired, and then a big bank came in and acquired that. And the writing was on the wall that everybody had to shift to selling managed product, and that wasn't what I was interested in. So I had built a bit of a venture capital portfolio within some of my higher net worth clients, where they take a small portion of their capital and deliver it into some growth stories. And we had a lot of success doing that. So I walked across the street and joined one of those companies that was relatively early in its business cycle. That became a business development job, and I think within 18 months I was the CEO. And the stock performance was pretty good. It was an internet startup. We made things on the internet move. I'm dating myself here, relative to animation and video content, and allowed the average person to create that content at a relatively low cost. So a pragmatic solution at the right time. Stock performance, I think, was probably around 40 or 50 times from bottom to top. And then obviously the internet decided to melt in 2000. That company continued, but they wanted to go in a different direction that was more technically oriented. I wanted to stay consumer. And so I moved into a consulting capacity with a couple of other tech companies. One of those was a quick takeout. I wasn't an investor, but I got part of that process. And then I started in the materials space, and that's how I evolved into doing technology and materials deals. Started my own capital firm in 2002, NextView Capital, was specifically focused only on materials and technology. And on the technology side, we've been focused basically since 2007 on artificial intelligence, automation, and the Internet of Things. Mostly in private companies that get acquired by other companies or licensed to technology. But we're bringing all of that basis, all of that tech side, into the material side. You'll see all of that relative to what we're doing in Homerun over the next while. So yeah, we're in a sweet spot, because the energy transition is really just a combination. Actually, it's a real focus point on how technology makes materials into solutions, and at its essence. So we've been doing that for many years, and we're quite comfortable operating in that environment.
I mean, I know that you aren't really a natural resource company, but still, I would like to ask you what sets Homerun apart from other natural resource companies, especially other silica companies.
The evolution of the vertical integration. I don't think it's a business model that people understand very well. It's a business model in its essence that really only is viable in certain regions of the world. The Chinese have perfected it. The Japanese do it. The Koreans do it. The Indians are now doing it. And you can do it in Brazil. And the basis of how it works is you have to have a fairly large domestic demand, so that the domestic demand creates the initial value proposition within the vertical integration. So it doesn't work in Canada. Like, there isn't a demand at the commercial level that allows a Canadian company, generally speaking, for instance, in the solar space, to be vertically integrated. the Canadian company has to right away focus on what its core capabilities and benefits are in Canada. And those eliminate a lot of the vertical integration possibilities. Whereas in Brazil, you have the perfect opportunity for a solar battery vertically integrated company. We don't ever have to leave the four walls of Brazil. And the Brazilian government has now created an environment that's conducive to that growing. So you've got, for instance, a solar market in Brazil that's 20, let's call it 20 gigawatts of install a year. You've got a domestic manufacturing capacity of 1 gigawatt a year, maybe 1.5. The rest is all imports. So the government looks at that, says, hey, we want to be bigger in the energy transition. We want to reindustrialize in the energy transition. Let's raise a tariff against foreign product, not specifically targeting any country, but just foreign product. But we all know that if you're importing solar, where it's coming from China. And so that 25% tariff is going to allow domestic companies, and they won't just be companies that are fueled by domestic capital. They will be Chinese companies that are coming in to capture the second largest solar market in the world based on built inventory, like an unbuilt inventory. So, China has an unbuilt inventory of solar of 200 gigawatts currently, and Brazil has an unbuilt inventory of 100 gigawatts currently. The next is double digits.
What's unbuilt inventory?
Permitted capacity that isn't built yet. So the land is in place, the permits are in place, but the project has not initiated build. And so that's if you're in the tech world, that's your pipeline, right? That's your pipeline. And so that pipeline in Brazil is huge. The demand in Brazil is 15 to 20 gigawatts going forward 10, 20 years to build out Brazil's solar capability. Brazil is also one of the best solar resources in the world. And again, you have to match solar resource with what I've just said. So there are places in the world that get a lot of sunshine, but they don't have the industrial scale or the population or the residential pull on the grid to generate a huge solar bill. Or they're like places where the weather is not conducive to building out solar from an economic and efficiency perspective. So these zones, which, you can go around the world and you can see where they are. It's Australia, but Australia is going to produce solar for Southeast Asia. You've got, Saharan Africa, in particular, Morocco and the northern parts of Africa, not producing solar for their own use, but producing solar for the giant population that's in Europe. You've got southern Spain, Portugal, Italy, places like that where you've got a good solar resource on an annualized basis. Then you swing across the Atlantic, you've got Brazil, you've got Chile in South America, and then you go all the way up Central America because most of those places get a lot of rain. And you go all the way up to northwestern Mexico and southwestern United States. It's another zone. And then you go over and you look at parts of China and Mongolia, and then you've done the cycle. Okay. So from that perspective, you've got to match that solar resource. Mother Nature's gift of 300 plus days of sunshine, like living in Dubai. But the difference is that Dubai is probably going to be a solar center. The Middle East in general will be a solar center, but it's going to have to focus on exports, right? It's going to have to focus on exporting that energy to areas that require energy because they don't have that resource. So that's really, really important. That allows you to build everything else, right? So solar resource, government willing to set the playing field so it favors domestic producers for a period of time. And then just the sheer demand within the domestic market that allows companies to profit and grow and get to a scale where they can be competitive outside of that jurisdiction. And in solar, the big companies are all Chinese. There are 4 or 5 major government-funded Chinese entities. Government subsidized is probably a better word. who have all been built off of silicon fabrication facilities that are the biggest silicon fabrication facilities in the world. And so silicon wafer solar will be dominated by China until it's not here anymore. You can't beat that anymore. That's done. Plus, nobody wants to build those fabrication facilities in their backyard anyways because they're dirty and nasty. But as solar transitions to new technologies, that you'll get more of an even playing field across technology-oriented countries, United States, Europe, etc. But you still have to go back to the original model, which is where do the solar economics work the best? And then look at, okay, how do I move these kilowatts to this market? And that technology is now in place, which is high voltage DC transportation of energy is this form of energy transportation that's new. It's being used more and more. Like Brazil is putting one in that goes from the solar region of the northeastern part of Brazil down to the industrialized area of the southern part of Brazil. So even in Brazil, you've got two aspects, two regions. One that is not so good with solar because it's too far south, and one that is perfect for solar because it's close to the equator and dry and sunny. And so from that perspective, those long trunk cables are analogous to large data pipes going across the ocean. So our view is going forward, you will see these regions that have a high solar footprint, a high solar resource, become net exporters of tremendously cheap energy because the cost of building solar on a capex basis is uncompetitive to all other energy generation. The cost of building solar now, there's no other energy that is competitive with that anymore. And now battery technology is starting to come in, and that creates a 24/7 energy source versus one that's periodically juiced by the sun. So the next step here is build out battery. Hence the second vertical within our vertical strategy, which is energy storage. So there's a lot of thought that went into this. There's a lot of thought that went into the business plan and where we build it. So the competitive advantage, honestly, is Brazil.
So let's talk the financial position before we dive into your different verticals or profit centers. So you raised 2.2 million Canadian last fall in gross proceeds. How much cash do you have now, and how much G&A do you expect to have for the year?
We don't have a huge burn on a daily basis or monthly basis. It's more of a periodic capital into various things that we do. And so we have about half of that capital still sitting in treasury. It's allocated to OPEX and CAPEX expenditures. And that is off of a cumulative 4 million that we've raised directly through financing at 10 cents, 50 cents, and $1.30. We've also gotten all the warrants exercised related to those financings. We now have a 75-cent warrant sitting out there with a pretty respectable gain on that warrant. So we'll start to knock on some doors. Our shareholders have been incredibly supportive, the ones who have helped finance the company, in exercising those warrants without hurting the market. I think that's surprising to most people who have owned Canadian junior stocks where warrants in the money tend to revert the share price back to the exercise price of the warrant. You haven't seen that with our deal. You get a cap, but our cap relative to warrants is related to the people who own the warrants making a rate of return on those warrants. So we've been very good at rewarding our shareholders. So roughly half of that 2.2 in the till. There'll be some CapEx expenditures that we're working on the plans for right now in 2025. So there's always a need for funding in a company like this until there isn't. But we're working right now on identifying and delivering on our first revenues within the vertical. I think that'll surprise some people. And so from that perspective, we're delivering our side of the story. And we're getting more and more interest from more sophisticated investor base, the retail base that has delivered our capital over the last 2 years of the business plan. we're starting to transition that based on the fact that we've executed into a more sophisticated capital base that involves bankers and research and all of that kind of stuff.
If you look at your news flow, you have had a lot of news releases since we last spoke, at least officially. So could you summarize the progress, at least the key progress that you have done since August of last year?
Yeah, we put out more news releases, I think, than most companies. But the reason why is because we have a granular business model. And I think that's what investors need to understand about Homerun. There is going to be a lot of news releases. When you do put out a lot of news releases, those news releases tend to get kind of lost in the ether, so to speak. But I think it's very important that people map the news releases against the quoted deliverables in our materials that we put out on the website and in our presentations. We try to update our deck every 30 days, and that's not to change the story. That's because we have an incredible amount of execution on deliverables within any 30-day period. So it warrants an update. And we've done a pretty good job of actually doing that. Tyler, our manager of all things communications, is really good at that. He's really good at making sure that the story is being told both verbally or verbally in text and also in formats that people prefer these days, which is audio visual. And so from that perspective, we have delivered on all of the 24-month deliverables that we stated we would deliver on. We're on time for all of those. I know everybody's waiting for something, and it will be on time. This is the first quarter of 2025. And so from that perspective, we're building something that's tremendously complicated. And I'm not going to simplify that. It's a vertically integrated company. And it's a vertically integrated company that takes a naturally produced raw material all the way through two verticals to finish solutions in those verticals. And so the key to that is the silica. And people got bored of us talking about our silica and our MRE and all that stuff. But the reality is, if you look at the business model and the key drivers in our business model, they're based on silica, and they're based on a particular silica, which is the high purity silica that we have in Belmonte, Brazil. And what I mean by that is the processing and sale of that silica is a core business. The transition of that silica into an advanced material called solar glass, because solar glass is an advanced version of silica. So one of the advanced materials coming off that silica, the first one is glass. We use energy to transition a raw material to a finished good. And that's solar glass. Why is that solar glass? We just talked about why that's solar glass. And a couple of elements in solar glass that are truly important for people to understand. And I know I say this all the time, but part of our message is to repeat. And what I mean by that is, in Brazil, you have an advantage making solar glass. Okay? Because the market in Brazil for solar is big. So you can build a big facility just to service a portion. So we're planning on building a 5 gigawatt equivalent solar glass plant. That 5 gigawatts is 1/4 of last year's installed solar in Brazil. 1/4. So we're not saying we're going to be everything in solar glass in Brazil. There's still going to be room for imports, but we can scale into that. And scaling into that will allow us to create economies of scale relative to exporting that product at some point in time. But we'll do that in a Lego model fashion. We'll do that as it makes sense within our business model. And the first iteration will be capitalized through finance. Hopefully the second iteration will be capitalized through the cash flow against finance. And that's how you scale properly. So that's the second big center point of our business. The third big center point of our business, again, is based on silica, which is taking that silica product, that high quality silica, placing it into a standardized format introducing electrical energy to that format, transitioning that electrical energy into the form of heat, storing that heat inside that silica, and then releasing that heat by cooling that silica and running that through a transition point that creates both industrial heat and energy, electricity. And that's the work that we've been doing with NREL. And that is the third major leg under the table. All three of those, the processing of our silica to a high quality standard, and everybody knows what that business is about now. That's the Sibelcos of the world playing all by themselves. The processing of that silica into solar glass, where we and our shareholders have an incredible competitive advantage in a marketplace where solar glass costs $700 to $800 a ton, like it does everywhere in the world. But we can produce it for $400 a ton because we're doing it inside the market that we're in, that we're selling to. And then the third is the transition of the NREL technology to a commercial, unitized energy storage and heat production solution that can be sold all over the world. And that relationship is growing. We'll have more on that relationship with NREL, and we'll be working with NREL to commercialize that system. We didn't just get involved with that so we could throw them a bucket of silica and they could tell us to walk away at the end of the day. We're not idiots. We got involved with that so that we became a key component relative to the development of that system. Our ideas are now in that system. That is this. And so from that perspective, we're the natural partner on that system. And we also have generative interest in that system because the natural place for that system is against an alternative generating capacity. So solar and battery are they're husband and wife. It's just a natural thing. And so from that perspective, that partnership is our vertical. Silica, silica, silica. Solar, energy storage. Boom. And that's what we started with. That's what we're executing on. That's what we've done. That entirety, the entirety of that vertically integrated strategy will be enunciated in the market by the end of this quarter. And you know, we got a lot of negative feedback relative to the Halocell transaction. Not for the price, because everybody thought the price was good, but people couldn't figure out what we were doing. And we've now got approval on that transaction. We're moving forward on that transaction. It's now 100% owned by Homerun, subject to legal dotted I's and crossed T's. But all that's done. And now what we'll do is we'll let people know exactly what we bought it for and exactly what's going to happen in that part of the company, because that's another key component. Across all of these, we have our 6 profit centers. And those 6 profit centers are all standalone businesses. Every single one of them has to stand on its own 2 feet. Collectively, there's 3+ unicorn potential inside of those, and I've described those already. But within that, there is 6 profit centers, and that is a vertically integrated company. And we pass that strategic advantage from one profit center to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And so from that perspective, that's a powerful business model. That business model can exist entirely in Brazil, but that's not what we're doing. Homerun Energy, what I just talked about, the Halocell will change its name to Homerun Energy. Homerun Energy is going to be focused on solutions in our vertical in the European marketplace plus. So that's what we said we would build. That's what we're building.
What have been the key announcements and the most important deliverables done since August?
Wow. The finalization of all of our logistics. I know that stuff's all boring, and I know people don't really understand what an LOI is within the business relationship. But putting all those partners together, in particular our processing partner, and you know, I mean, I'm not allowed to say the name of the processing partner based on caveats that we agreed to in the agreements, but the reality is everybody knows who it is. And this is how we work, right? Within that Belmont district, we stated we would be a strategic control player in the district. Making that partnership achieve that. And the reason why is that partner is a big company. That partner is the biggest silica company in Latin America, and obviously the biggest silica company in Brazil. That partner has already expended capital for first stage processing, which is the wash and sort plant, which literally, if you stand on our concessions, if you stand on the silica, on our concessions, Jasper, and you throw a rock, if you're a 3-year-old child, you will be able to hit that processing plant. Why would we build one? The idea is to partner with the folks who have built one so that that is built into, if we have to share a bit of that, we have 6 profit centers. We have to share a bit of one profit center in order to get strategic advantage across the other 5. Well done. And so from that perspective, that's what we've done. I think that's something that got ignored by the market. The MRE, demonstrating the resource, is important because from a regulatory perspective, the perception is that we need a 43101 resource to be something. What I don't understand is we don't get anything for our resource. Like, we announced 63 million tons in a surface level area of our concessions. Forget the partnerships. But we announced it. Forget that we bought another one in Guidoni. But just look at the 63 million tons. Like, in a copper company, when you put out an MRE, you get 1% for the in situ value of your copper. So if copper's at $5, you get a nickel. If it's at $3, you get 3 cents. That's the valuation of a copper company not in production, not near production. Okay? So if we were a silica not near production, our product will sell for minimum 150, but we don't care about that market. What we care about is the 500 plus. So if this product sells for $500 a ton, based on us processing it, doesn't it have some value if you've got 63 million tons in the ground? Like, can we get $1 for that? Like, $1 is not even 1% of the commercial value of the product post-processing at a profit. A better profit than copper, by the way. And we don't get anything for it. So our current valuation is superseded by the in situ value of our current resource. But we get it, because we told everybody we're not a mining company, but we should get something for that as a value proposition against the rest of the business. So if you look at our current market cap, it's lower than that. Because that would be 63 million US dollars, right? And so from that perspective, basically $100 million value is right there in that resource. Plus add Guidoni. Now it's 100 million US in that resource. Plus add our partnerships. Plus add the processing that's already there. Plus add the relationships that we have with the other player in the district that where we're trying to take over control. Not to own everything. That's not our purpose. Our purpose isn't to spend shareholder money on buying more silica. No offense, we don't need more silica. If I sell 1 million tons of silica a year, I will be long dead and my grandchildren will be old before we run out of our own silica. So from that perspective, we have enough silica. It's just what value do we get for owning that silica? And what value do we get for the business model that we're building around that silica? My argument is we're getting this. 0. And I get that. Once we produce cash flow through those elements, we'll probably get a value. But that value is going to go pop. Because once you have cash flow, there's a number that gets multiplied by the cash flow, and that gives you another value. So these incremental value builds are not being reflected in the share price even closely. That's a key. But getting the asset last year, getting the Guidoni last year, getting the MRE last year, getting all the logistics, in particular our processing partner, which is an incredibly good relationship with a major company. If people want us to be friends with big players, I'm sorry, but that's a big player. Go look at their shareholders. Their shareholders are 2 of the biggest material companies in the world. Integrated material companies. They're the shareholders of our partner. It doesn't get any bigger than that. Right? We'd have to go to another universe to find bigger materials companies than the ones that we're currently partnered with. Checkbox. Okay? Then what we've done is we've added in the relationships and we've added in the novel IP, right? Because when you want to build a company, you have to build intellectual property in that company. It's great having a good team, but you got to combine that team with creative thought. Creative thought is identified when you deliver IP. We've delivered IP. We found a new way in an old industry to process a grain of silica from a raw material to a finished good of higher quality. We zapped it with a laser. And that may sound whatever to everybody, But guess what? We're the first guys to do that. The company you own is the first company to do that. That's like going, hey, Google, what are you working on? Oh, we're working on internet search. What the hell is internet search and what's the value of that? Well, we're the first guys. Okay, whatever. We're the first guys. So when companies start to use electrical processing methods, thermoelectric processing methods, in order to get away from burning hydrocarbon materials, in order to clean up industrial process, this is what it looks like. It's, hey, let's use a laser instead of let's burn some coal. And so from that perspective, people should go, wow, I own that company. They're leading the industry now. That wasn't Sibelco doing that. That was us. Sibelco has hundreds of PhDs working for it in a lab somewhere, and none of them came up with that idea. We did. We'll do that again to take that product to a more advanced stage. So on the advanced materials side, we're also working on potential unicorns. These are not in our business model. We get nothing for the fact that we generated this. We get, can you scale it? Give us time. We thought of it, we'll scale it. Who thought of putting silica in a thermal energy storage system to process it? Oh, I know. We did. 30 PhDs working at NREL on the energy storage system, and not a single one of those gifted. They're gifted people. Took the blinders off long enough. And I don't mean this to be derogatory. These people are focused on their mission, which is to build an energy storage system. They're not focused on processing silica. That's our job. But when we saw that, we went, holy cow. They get to 1,000 degrees Celsius. We drop silica in there. We keep it in there long enough. We cycle it. We add a little acid at the end of the process. And guess what? We've just created calcination and acid leach, a 200-year-old process that's currently done by burning hydrocarbons. Elegant. Solar field. Solar plant with batteries generating 24-hour power. Coming into an energy storage system. Clean. No carbon footprint. Dump silica in. No carbon footprint. Silica comes out, processed. Apply an acid solution to that, no carbon footprint. Put that back into another container, sell that at a higher price, no carbon footprint. That's the new world, folks. And you own it. It's in our company.
What would you like in your business plan to have accomplished by the end of this year?
I'd like to see revenue off the HPQ processing, and I mean the plus 99.99. We're on path for that. We are getting engineers to tell us. One of the things we did with NREL, this is really important because, some of the news that we have, we don't report because it's boring and long. The first phase of what we did under the NREL agreement, if everybody read the news releases, several of them, is that we were working on all of the testing to use traditional mechanisms to take our silica to 99.99 plus. The way we precursed that was we said, hey, can we actually do this? And we got UC Davis to zap it with a laser to show us that if you apply the right thermal energy to this thing, you will take it to 99.99, which means it's capable of getting there, right? So when you're coaching a kid and the kid says, hey, I want to run the 100 meters, and you look at the kid and they're the slowest kid on the track, you'd have to take that child and say, hey, maybe shot put or maybe long jump, or maybe not the 100 meter, maybe the 400, maybe the 800, right? You got to move that. Okay. That's what we did. We went, okay, can we run the sprint here? Can we do the elite event? Can we get to 99.99? Yes, we can. Boom. Now let's use the traditional method. That takes time. So we put cost controls on that by getting scientists to do that in conjunction with other work, which was create the silica energy storage system and how we calibrate processing into that system. That took time. That is hundreds of tests, boring stuff in a lab. Acid first, grind first, clean first, do this, now do it this way, now do it this way, now do it this way. Now I lose track of what they're doing just based on the fact that there's so many different tests. And then we take all of that data and we look at the data maps and we go, okay, look, that worked and that worked. Okay, let's do this. That's a stage now. Where does it occur? I don't know. Maybe here, maybe here, maybe here. Okay, let's do it all in sequence now. Okay, that's okay, but it could be better. Let's change the sequence now. We've done all that. Now we've taken all of that data package to a silica engineering firm to save the money, because they would have charged us hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. And we spent tens of thousands of dollars to do that with NREL, plus got something else out of it. And now they'll do that work, and they'll give us what's called the process flow, which is standard mining thing. And that process flow will determine the equipment that's required. And then we'll go out and capitalize that equipment. We have a potential processing partner interest in that. Again, you don't have to shoot a long arrow to figure out who that might be. So we can defer the capex on that to a partnership and produce a product that goes into that 3 to 5 million tons a year of $500 plus silica. Hence, we will have achieved what we want to do, which is to sell our silica to end users, not sell our unprocessed silica to processors who will sell it to end users. We want all the margin. We don't want this piece. We want all of it. We're greedy when it comes to margin. We're cheap when it comes to capex. We're greedy when it comes to margin. And so from that perspective, that's a high margin business versus a low margin business. Way less throughput, way less logistics, moving way less tons, making way more money per ton. Smart business. And at the same time, we move that into the feasibility study for the solar glass plant. That's the second thing we want to get done this year. So production from the processing plant of the HPQ Silica, number one. Find the bankable feasibility study, and we're ready to do that. We're just finalizing. We're waiting for our land, actually, so that we can implement, or we can put that piece of land into the feasibility study versus some conceptual piece of land which degrades from the feasibility study. And so we need that land. Once we have that land, that will all be plugged into the feasibility study. We've done all the numbers. We've got all the inputs. We've lined up who the suppliers would be, et cetera, et cetera. That's the basis of a feasibility study. Then we go to a really fancy engineering firm with a fancy name so that bankers listen to the feasibility study. We're not getting this done by XYZ Sao Paulo. We're going to get this done by a significant branded engineering firm that works in the resource and material space and makes bankable feasibility studies. It will cost us more money. That's money well spent. That's another key one. And the other one is revenue within the vertical. And we already have identifiable revenue in the vertical if people are patient enough to wait for the next news release related to what we bought with Halocell. So from that perspective, we're hitting on all cylinders. That's what we want to do this year. 2026 would be hopefully build the glass plant, the solar glass plant, scale the processing of the high purity silica, and continue to build out the solution side, the energy solution side of the business. And then 2027, late 26, early 27 would be the sale of solar glass in a competitive advantage in the second largest solar glass market in the world. So that's the next, that's 25, 26, 27. Hence why I said, just sit back and enjoy your vacation. Those are massive propositions relative to cash flow multiples. We've done the numbers, folks. We've done the numbers. When I say I want to build a unicorn, I'm not fucking around. I want to build a unicorn. And we use a conservative model against just the cash flow coming from the solar glass plant. Unicorn one. Not in Canadian dollars, US dollars. If the processing plant achieves what it can do, that's another potential unicorn. If the thermal energy storage achieves what it can do, that's another potential unicorn. But there's 6 profit centers across the whole thing, including perovskite, which we haven't even talked about.
Awesome. So, I mean, let's talk about Profit Center 1, which is your high purity in quartz silica that you have. So, you got the MRE, you got the environmental permit, you're waiting for the mining permit. What is the timeline on that?
That'll be immediate after we file the 43101. They don't call it that in Brazil, but we have to do what's called a mining report and file that with the A&M. Instead of being redundant, we'll just make one report that will go to the 2 regulatory bodies. And that basically gives us a stamp of approval. We don't need that though. I could sell silica today. We've got permitted silica in our organization, period. And it's cheap. Because if people haven't realized what we've done is all of these deals just keep delivering a cheaper per unit cost to us. What we will do with our partners is we will compile that. We'll compile the demand that we create across our partners so that they sell some of their silica while we sell some of our silica. Everybody is in compliance with their lease agreements with the government. 80% of that district, the underlying resource is owned by the government. It's controlled through a lease, like us. There's only one private entity there. We have a supply agreement with the private entity. We're working on that private entity to lower their price, so it's reasonable relative to what we're looking at. Guidoni's lease cost, because they signed their lease way before us, their lease cost is $4.50. Ours is 10. But we'll still put $1 on every ton into our educational fund that we agreed to build with the government of Bahia. So it won't be, oh, you don't have to pay that because it's not in the lease. That's in the lease. Every time we sell a ton of silica from that district under any of our ownership, under any of our partnership, $1 will be added to that educational fund.
Good for getting the community on board as well.
Yeah, it's the
and
missing element.
as well giving back.
Yeah, it's the missing element in Brazil. How do you empower people? You educate people to empower. Period.
So the group will carry out the extraction and the processing. Is that right? Both.
Yeah, it's that group that's owned by those two big companies.
And that
I don't want to
partnership.
be in the mining business. I've done that. That is not a complicated part of our business. It's something that needs to be done. It's a key part of the business. I'm not belittling it, but I think it's better that we focus on the more difficult elements of the business and we let somebody who's been mining or extracting and processing silica for decades, let them go run that business. They're good at it. They're really good at it.
Could you explain? So once you start to mine and sell that silica, or they do it for you, what price do you expect to realize, and also what margin per ton do you expect to have? Ballpark.
I expect to sell silica at plus 99.99%.
So that's what, around $300 per ton?
No, it's higher.
500.
No, it's higher.
It's higher, okay. And the cost to do that? Ballpark.
Less. We're greedy on margin. What makes more sense? Selling 100,000 tons for a $10 margin, or selling 10,000 tons for a several $100 margin?
But this is without thermal processing, I assume.
No, that's with thermal processing. You can't achieve 99.99. Nobody in the world has plus 99.99%.
No, but when you start to sell later this year, you won't have thermal processing plant available.
Yes, we will.
You will.
Our goal is to build that plant this year. Those are not complicated stuff. That is a rotary kiln with a special lining so it doesn't contaminate your material, and an acid wash system. Front end, back end, with a grind. But it's 10,000 tons. 10,000 tons a month is minimal. That's what's that? 300 tons a day. So 300 tons a day moving through that system. Those systems tap out from a capacity perspective against economics. So what we've done is we've gone, okay, 10,000 tons is a first iteration line, okay? So once we have that, we can build a second line, a third line, a fourth line. All of the infrastructure that's required for that will already be in place. So the utilities, etc., will already be there. It's just tapping those utilities into the second line, third line. So you go 10, 20, 30, 40, 50.
And that's commercial plant design. That's what the University of US Davis is working on with you.
No, that's what we're working on. That's what we were working on with NREL, and that's what we're now working on with the foremost silica processing guys in the Western world. The land for the processing plant, that's the hoo-ha-ha that they heard out of the social media coming out of the Belmont government over the last 30 days. So we're going to get a piece of land to execute on building that plant. We'll be permitted relative to the mining of the material. We already are through our partners, and we will be permitted ourselves. We'll have to get a permit for that plant. That's a relatively simple process. But it's not a complex facility. We're not building a SXEW plant for a copper mine. We're not building a concentrate plant for a copper mine. We're building a rotary kiln and some acid wash capabilities. That's it. Pretty simple stuff.
What work do you have to do before starting construction, and what do you think would be how long it would take to?
Yeah, so the engineers are going to finalize the work that was done over the last year by NREL. When they finalize that engineering, then we'll have the equipment list. That equipment will be implemented into the process flow that we already have, and that will be the basic engineering with a aluminum house around it, basically. and a concrete platform.
And will you build it together with your processing partner, or will you build it on your own, do you think?
I like our processing partner. I'd prefer that we build it with our processing partner. There's enough margin there to go around for everybody.
But it's a relatively small less than 50 million Canadian capex.
Less than 20 million probably. But yeah, it's a low capex relative to the output. Nobody builds these things though because they don't have the quality of silica to do so. So it has to be justified, right? Ours is justified. We've proven it. It's justified. So now it's just working through the engineering work with Anzaplan. Those are the guys in Germany that we've used before. And so when Anzaplan has done its work, then we'll be done our work and we'll set about building the plant.
So you won't start mining until the thermal processing plant is in place?
No, I mean, we could sell right now if we wanted to, but price has to match what we want. So we're not going to try and break a leg selling a product for $2 profit. Not interested. The logistics behind that are ginormous. Like people don't understand the energy that goes into moving large quantities of materials. It's huge.
But you still have to wash, dry, and bag it and sort it as well before you thermally process it.
We'll wash and sort. You don't have to bag it. We'll wash and sort. We'll take it to the facility, which will be in Belmont. So it'll either be in close proximity to the resource or in close proximity to the resource because it'll be in Belmont. It's not a huge area. But we'll do that in an area that makes sense relative to where we are and what we need. And what we need is energy. That's what we need. We need good, solid supply of energy. Now, be aware that in our district, there's a small little company called Halocell, which is $1 billion operation, and they are a stone's throw away from our resource. So they've already done way more than what we need to do, and they've done it really, really well. So from that perspective, can it be done? Yeah, easily. It's the equivalent of building a bathroom in their house. They built a house. We only have to build a bathroom.
And what kind of customers will be buying the ultra high purity silica?
All the ones that are contacting us saying, hey, can you take this to 99.99? Korea, Japan, China, Germany. It's the real market for what we want.
And all the infrastructure, and not infrastructure, but port facilities and logistics, that has been
10,000 tons a month is easy. Yeah. It'll all be, you got to remember, this is a specialty product. It's worth a fortune. So this is not a bulk, throw it in a container kind of thing. This is, go watch, we put a video out, or we borrowed a video, the link for how Sibelco processes its product. Take out the first 5 steps and just do the last one. Because they ship their product for calcination and acid leach to Europe. But it's always in these beautiful blue barrels. You've probably seen them. These chemistry or chemical or material barrels. They're like the little bit lighter than the color of your shirt. Those are the shipping containers that you use because the product's worth a fortune, right? You're talking $500 to several $1,000s a ton.
Solar glass. You will be looking to build your own, or in conjunction with a partner, your own solar glass plant in Brazil?
I'll put it in SPV, so it'll be like Homerun Energy Brazil or Homerun Solar Glass Brazil or something like that. We'll throw that into an SPV, special purpose vehicle. We do not want to dilute our holding company against the entirety of the vertical with a single element of the vertical. Get the strategy, right? The holding company is the facilitator of the entirety of the vertical. It doesn't need to own 100% of each element in the vertical. It wants to own as much as possible. But the idea is to fast track this vertical integration. These things take years to build. We're going to do this in 36 months. And 24 of those months are done. So from that perspective, like people will have, in the first half of this year, we'll have literally identified to the market the entirety of what we are building in the vertical. All disclosed. Now, just watch us execute on each piece of this like we've executed on the entirety of the vertical. Then it's just deliver capital into each of those, but try and do that through partnerships. And if that partner is smarter than us, like on the processing, boom. If that partner is richer than us, like on the solar glass plant, then boom, yeah, share it. Share it. There's lots of money to go around. We have a $50 million market cap.
So, solar glass plant, could you give us the key points on what production size, location, cost, construction period, etc. we'll be looking at?
I'll walk you through it. So the goal is to build a 1,000 ton a day plant that will not operate at that. Optimal will probably be somewhere around 90% because you never achieve 1,000 or 100% throughput. So let's go 90% of that. That runs through the margin on that based on our numbers, which are detailed and done by really intelligent people from the space, people who have run glass plants and built glass plants, not Brian Leeners. When I say something, it's because somebody smarter than me has done the work. I just say it. So from that perspective, that's what we're building. The keys to that are delivery of the engineering. We've got two firms competing to be the engineers on that. One is in, the other's in. Now we're getting them both to go back and forth to give us clarity so that we can actually reconcile the two against each other, because they're like apples and oranges when you get these things and you want them to speak the same language. So the same language is one that we understand, so that when one engineering group is saying this and another one's saying this, what do you actually say? So we can look down the middle and say, okay, this ticks this box, this ticks this box, and then we pick one, the one that ticks the most boxes. We kind of know who that is. So from that perspective, that's a key. Getting the ground, that's a key. Getting the bankable feasibility study done by a name brand. We need Coca-Cola Engineering Group here. And the reason why is because when you walk into a banking entity or a government banking entity or any other entity that has capital for your project, they're going to take Coca-Cola Engineering more seriously than they take XYZ Sao Paulo Engineering. Those guys in Sao Paulo are good, don't get me wrong, but we'll get more bandwidth by having Coca-Cola Engineering. So we've identified those groups. We've got that down to 3 groups. We'll pick one of those groups once those other 2 deliverables in place. Then finance that thing and run with that bankable feasibility. Let's call that $500,000 US.
What location are you looking at preliminary?
Camaçari.
And what's the preliminary capex that was outlined in the budget that you
It's
announced?
150 million US for the equipment, give or take 10%. And the all-in cost fully completed is 250 million US. A comparative facility built in Europe is 1 billion euros. A comparative facility built in the United States of America is $1 billion.
And construction period?
Total all in. We can build that in Brazil for 250 million US.
And the time to complete
a
construction
CapEx
ballpark?
advantage. There's a CapEx advantage as well as an OpEx advantage. The time for construction is a year. Bankable feasibility will be done this year. So we're giving, 2026 the year of build, and then early 2027 the year of initiating production from that point.
And when will
24 months from today. Once we've got the bankable feasibility study and once we're building that plant, this is what people don't understand. Once we're building that plant, the analysts will start projecting value against the cash flow. Prior to that, some early analysts will project that. They'll say, whoa, I've seen the bankable feasibility study. This is going to get financed. When it gets financed, this company's going to produce this amount of product on an annualized basis. These are my numbers based on the Brazilian market and the Brazilian demand and the price of this product in that market. And this is the discounted cash flow for that 1 year before that cash flow starts. Here's my stock price.
And what price do you get on your offtake, and what cost do you expect all in to produce the solar glass?
We're getting quoted $750 in our LOIs. Those LOIs will go to formal agreements once we either have the bankable feasibility study in place or we have the final plant built, depending on the partner. And those will keep growing, because what's happening now is with this new 25% tariff in Brazil, the Chinese are not going to go, I'm leaving Brazil. It's the second largest solar market in the world. They're not leaving Brazil. What they're going to do is they're going to build capacity in Brazil. And they're going to buy our glass because our glass will be cheaper than the glass that they can produce in China. They want to make more money.
The cost to produce it?
400. 400 is passing a profit to our silica business. A nice profit, right? So from that perspective, that 400 includes the silica business as a profit center, because that business needs to make money from whoever it sells product to. It's selling product to the solar glass plant. The solar glass plant has a $400 cost per unit based on the silica company making money and making good money.
And so if you produce 365,000 tons of solar glass in a year, how much silica sand do you need as input from your Belmont district?
300,000 tons.
Okay, and that just need to be washed and sorted.
washed and sorted and transported. Yeah.
When should we expect more news on the solar glass front?
Land grant probably first. Choosing of the engineering firms probably in conjunction with that or proximal to that. And then the announcement of who we're using for the bankable feasibility study. The finalization of the bankable feasibility study. Concluding the process of introducing the project to the bankers. But, all we can say to bankers right now is we have an interesting project, watch us. So we don't have a bankable feasibility study. Once we have the bankable feasibility study, then we hit the road and go to the brokers who have all been introduced to the opportunity. The idea there is to create a big pack of people who want to be involved in that time period. So once we do that, getting financing should be relatively cheap. I mean, the margins are exceptional against the capex, do the numbers. The ROI is incredible, no matter how you finance it. So from that perspective, the idea here is to give up the minimal amount of equity against debt in the building of that plant. Because the equity that is in that plant right now is 100% Homerun. So my job is to maximize Homerun's equity in that plant, that SPV vehicle that owns the plant at the end of the day.
And what
And the key to
partnerships?
that is to have a really good feasibility study by a name-bred entity, introduce it to as many banking partners as possible, and get the best terms on that financing that we possibly can.
So what partnerships are you seeking, and what financing alternatives are you contemplating?
Government financing at really good terms and rates, private financing at good terms and rates, international financing for development at good terms and rates, private financing at not so good terms and rates, equity inside the SPV. There will be some equity component, I would imagine. There always is. But that won't be a Homerun equity component. That will be Homerun giving up a piece of the business that it created. So from that perspective, we'll look at all of those different opportunities, and each of those is different, but that they're all kind of the same. Just it's going to be a blend, right? It's going to be a blend of that. I don't think one entity will step up for the whole thing. Maybe. And if it does, it's probably some entity that gives us really good terms.
And could the permitting process potentially delay the construction of the facility?
I don't really think so, because we're going to be getting land inside of an industrial park, so the permitting process is relatively easy. There's no nasty in producing solar glass, so it's not like we have outputs that are deleterious to the environment or anything like that. So, it's a hydrocarbon-based system that will be hybrid with electricity. So I would assume, based on the fact we're probably going to build the latest one in the world, that we would have the cleanest one in the world. We're trying to focus on minimizing the antimony content. That's a big issue in solar glass. The Chinese are using more and more impure silica to produce solar glass, because countries are realizing the value of their silica and the size of the solar glass market. So the amount of impurities that are going into Chinese solar glass is rising. They're offsetting that with antimony. While at the same time, the Americans and the Europeans are nervous about that, because solar glass currently is not really economically recyclable because of the antimony content.
Let's move to your perovskite profit center. You acquired Halocell Europe, a research and development company focused on perovskite. What was the acquisition cost, and what is the rationale for the acquisition?
I thought we would get cheered for that, actually. I mean, I've done a lot of deals. I told you earlier, I'm a lawyer, right? So I've negotiated. I don't know how many. I've probably done several thousand deals. And that deal was elegant from the perspective that normally these deals are like shares and cash. Your cash is sinkhole cash, right? It's like, here, Jasper, I'm buying that shirt. I'm going to give you a share, and I'm going to give you $1. Sorry, I should have given you more. That's a nice shirt. But here's 10 shares and here's $10. Okay. So from that perspective, we didn't do that. We issued like 1.1 million shares to buy the asset, and they're subject to terms relative to the sale. And I don't think those are hitting the market anytime soon. And we cut them a check for 600 grand Australian. So like 550 Canadian. Normally, that would just be sinkhole cash. In other words, it would just be, here's your money. See you later. Go do whatever you want. We didn't do that. We went, okay, we'll cut you cash, but we want a piece of the other company. because the other company's still going to stay in the perovskite space based in Australia. That's the one everybody did their due diligence on and went, oh, I don't understand what Brian's doing. They did their due diligence on the wrong company, by the way. We bought Halocell Europe. They don't have a website. So from this perspective, we got a piece of their business. I like their business. I'm from the IoT device space. Okay. I've done a lot of work in business in that area, and they're making small little perovskite cells that will attach to devices so that those devices aren't connected to a power source, and so that those little cells can charge a battery that sits inside that device. And the number one detriment to the sale of IoT devices, and I know that because I have an IoT company that sold devices, the number one detriment in that space, literally, is human behavior. People hate changing batteries. Like, people will sit there and use their clicker on their television to the point where the performance is insanely bad before they'll get up on their 2 pins and get 2 new batteries and put them back in so that their clicker performs better. They literally go like this to make their batteries work better rather than replacing the batteries. So what Australia is working on is really good. They have a lot of interest from some major device makers around the world, consumer products around the world, to attach those cells. And those perovskite cells are what are called indoor perovskite. In other words, they utilize ambient light capture to transition the ambient light from like light source inside the home and light coming in through the glass in the home. That's the ambient light in the home. They use that to charge the device. If you're in a restaurant, you can use solar, right? So you'd flip your iPhone, for instance, upside down. If it's got this little battery or this little solar collection device on it, then it would charge your device. So I like their business. Their business is really cool. The Australian government likes their business. So there's a leveraged investment there relative to participating in a non-related business, but it's a good one. And it's solar, so it's slightly inside of our parameters. But we did that through an equity infusion into their company to help them move forward, not a cash dump where they walk away. So it was an elegant deal. And what we got in Halocell, I don't want to go into too much detail right now because you're going to ruin my news release that's coming up, which will describe everything that we bought in Halocell. People have to understand the process of working with regulators on approval of that transaction, especially in a vertically integrated company. It's relatively difficult to get approval on things without the regulators transitioning into some major review process for big dollar. I gotta be careful what I say. Some regulator might watch this. But that's the reality of the regulatory environment that we sit in. They're doing their job, but sometimes their job is a bit overburdened. And so from that perspective, what we did was we went, okay, what do we want to build at the other end of our vertical? What do companies need when they make products? They need distribution. They need marketing. They need sales. They need technology. They need solutions that they can sell into the market on top of what they're building. That's what we're buying in Halocell. So when people see the Halocell news release, not only will they realize that we're going to have revenue in that business, there is revenue in that business through related parts of that business, but they're also going to realize that underneath that they've just seen the tip of the iceberg. The perovskite research is in particular to what we want to see, which is perovskite on glass, solar perovskite, outdoor perovskite. In building integrated perovskite, for instance, where a building becomes its own generator of energy through the facade that is attached to that building, which currently is dormant. And so from that perspective, those are the areas that we're looking at. We're not looking at competing with the Chinese to build perovskite solar cells. Maybe, and we'll have an advantage in Brazil doing that, because guess what? Perovskite gets sprayed on glass. Sold. I mean, it's more complicated than that. I'm simplifying it, but that's what it is. So when we say we're buying perovskite on glass, we're buying perovskite on solar glass. One of the things that we're looking at doing is a perovskite sandwich, which is solar on top of solar glass, okay, with perovskite layer in between as a functioning tandem in a module. Tandem is new vogue in solar. So people are increasing the efficiency of a solar cell by adding a tandem to the current silicon cell that's already there. So it's a layered, hence a tandem. It's a tandem like parachuting in tandem. You're partnered with the person who has the parachute. It's the same with tandem solar. So we're looking at that. We're looking at business integrated perovskite, but we're also looking at all of the solutions that relate to energy storage, that relate to solar modules, that relate to technologies that fit over top of that. Again, I'm going to say it one more time. I come from the tech world. One of the missing elements here is systems that sit over top of these energy devices, whether they're solar or wind or whatever, and the batteries that sit next to them. It's systems. That is recurring revenue. That is revenue that has really high margins. I come from the software as a service industry. Okay? It's the best business in the world. That is Apple. Sell some hardware, slap on some software as a service, make 100% margin here, and make a good margin here. Apple makes really good margin on their hardware. They make great margin on their software services that are on top of the hardware. That's the business model going forward in energy. That's the business model we want to be a piece of. That's the business model that you now own because you own Homerun, which owns 100% of Halocell, which is going to change its name to Homerun Energy and be based in Europe, but will spread those wings all over the planet. So this won't be a regionalized business model. This will be a business model that currently is in revenue, is in growing revenue, is a significant player in that space, and we're bolting that on. All for our shareholders.
And energy storage, your fourth profit center. Could you give us the game plan for the energy storage profit center and explain the partnership with NREL, which is the US Department of Energy?
The NREL is a long-term partnership. It initiated, I literally was doing Google searches on different types of energy storage systems that used inert media in order to store the energy. So thermal energy storage systems. Google search. Google actually has some value. And so I actually found the Belmont resource using Google, by the way. So I recommend that all CEOs use Google searches, but don't get past the first page. It's all paid for. So from that perspective, we found NREL. We watched what they were doing. They were taking silica and using it to store energy, and I already talked about that. But what they were doing is they were working on giant utility scale systems. And so what we did was we went back and forth with them and said, hey, while we're working on integrating processing into the giant system, and the U.S. government is now going to build a pilot, pay for a pilot to build one of those. That's funded, and that'll be built in Denver. That'll be the first sort of commercial scale. It'll be a pilot, but it'll be a commercial scale system. That is already moving forward. We've now designed. I can show you. I was on a conference call with NREL scientists yesterday, and we have a deck that keeps growing with the work that they're doing. But all of the engineering diagrams, all of the equipment needs, everything has been identified for that system as well as another system. And the other system is something that we've been working specifically with NREL on, which is a unitized version of that. In other words, like a 1 megawatt times X. So if you want 10 megawatts of energy storage, you buy 10 units. If you want 20, you buy 20 units. But a really low OPEX, relatively low CAPEX versus equivalent lithium ion batteries, which are expensive. And this system doesn't light on fire on a regular basis. This system actually is very functional over a long period of time. To put this into context of a real world phenomenon, there's a company in California called Rondo. Rondo is currently using a refractory brick system. So where we use silica, they use refractory bricks. If you don't know what that is, look it up. Their refractory bricks are developed in Vietnam. Making refractory bricks is a greenhouse gas producing, it's worse than cement. And so they leave all of that environmental pollution in Vietnam, and then they take those finished bricks, they put them on a boat, and they send them to the United States and go, hey, we've got a clean and green system because we use refractory bricks inside of a container. So they put them inside a container, they have a heater, they have a cooler, and that system sells for a lot of money, and it sells into the commercial industrial space, companies that want energy storage plus heat. So a lot of industrial processes require heat. The best thing for a thermal energy storage system is a 50-50 split between energy storage and heat production. And there are a lot of companies. We've already been contacted by several companies, big name companies, who have come to us and said, hey, is your battery ready? Because we need it. And these are companies that service the food processing sectors. These are companies that service the pharmaceutical sector, et cetera, et cetera. There's a ton of industries that need this product. So from that perspective, we have that product. That company, Rondo, I think it's already $1 billion market cap. It's many hundreds of millions. They're raising tens of millions of dollars against their valuation. They're in commercial now. They're commercial and they're selling that product. The distinction between the two is that they use the bricks. We use the silica. The economic distinction between those two is that refractory bricks are $2 to $4 a kilogram. My silica is 10 cents a kilogram. So you can figure that model out. We have a cheaper medium of energy storage. Everything else is really similar. We have a clean green solution. Mother Nature created my silica. I just have to wash it. Mother Nature does not make refractory bricks. Vietnam makes refractory bricks by burning coal and producing greenhouse gases and disgusting waste material. So from that perspective, we are really green and clean. And we'll use that obviously in the marketing side. But that is ready to move into the commercial phase. So we've been working on that. We've identified the partners that need to come on board relative to that system. In other words, the equipment and the manufacturing of that will third party manufacture that system. And so the idea is that we move that to commercial faster than the big systems that everybody has seen where the silica will be processed inside the system at a utility industrial scale. These will be standardized, unitized systems going into industrial purposes, but specifically with industrial end users, not utility. Well, I guess you could use it utility scale as well. So for instance, like in Toronto, if people are familiar with Toronto, a lot of the energy in Toronto downtown, the heat energy comes from a steam system that's underground all the buildings, and it's a connected plumbing system. They generate that steam and it flows through all that system. So we could put our system in relatively close to Toronto, the downtown area, and not only do energy storage during low periods in the cycle, and the low period price in Ontario is incredibly cheap. It's something that Trump should keep in mind when he pisses off Canadian energy companies. He's getting cheap energy. The reality is that price point is really low. The price point at the peak of the cycle is really high. So it's called power shaving. You can get a power shaving model going there, and at the same time, you can generate steam that would go into that steam system as an adjunct to that. When that NREL system is utilized for both heat generation and energy storage, it's 90+% efficient. That's better than any system out there.
So your fifth profit center, solar modules. Could you just give us an update on the game plan there for this year?
Yeah, ultimately, as I said, we can move the perovskite into something that looks like a solar module or something that complements a solar module. But we've been approached by module producers in Brazil, and there's a reason why. Brazil has a tax regime, and that regime relates to the first mover in any new industry. So what Brazil does is it rewards first mover. In other words, the risk you take being a first mover, you get rewarded for that. And it's through tax incentives. And they're tax incentives relative to the actual company, and they're tax incentives relative to purchasing from that company. So in other words, the consumption of that company's products have a lower tax rate or no tax rate. So it's a special category. We're in the application process for that category. If we get that, we all of a sudden become one of these amazing little integrated, vertically tax-friendly companies inside of Brazil. And so what these companies are looking at, they only do one piece. They make module. Okay? So if people don't understand, in the solar business, there is wafers, glass, and ancillary components. That all goes to a factory, and that factory puts all those pieces together. So that's called a solar manufacturer, okay? They don't usually make the materials that they put together. Some do, some don't. But in Brazil, they don't. So they're not seen as a vertically integrated player. They can't get that tax benefit. If they integrate into our vertical integration, then they would get that. So they're looking for partnership with Homerun because we're in the process of getting that consideration. And that puts them in a competitive advantage to be the most competitive player in the Brazilian market. So that's why we added in there, because we've looked at it ourselves. We also are in dialogue with the two individuals who have built most of the solar capacity in Brazil. It's two guys. They're incredibly smart. They built BYD's facility. They built Senge's facility. Those guys are really good guys, and they're interested in helping us out if we do actually want to build our own solar module facility with our own vertical. So we leave it in there. because some form of that will be part of our business plan.
Which out of these verticals do you think have most potential?
The one vertical, the whole thing. Yeah, and this model works really well. As I stated at the beginning of this interview, this model works really well in certain places in the world. It works in China. It's how China dominates industry. People go, oh yeah, China's dominating, but they don't go into why. The Chinese dominate because they build complete vertically integrated companies from soup to nuts inside their four walls. If they don't have the raw material, they go out and source it really cheaply from the closest source they can get and bend over and get a really good price. China doesn't produce a lot of copper raw material, but it buys a lot of copper. China produces a ton of copper products, both for the domestic market and for the international market. That's vertical integration. In the solar business, the Chinese companies make the wafers, they make the glass, they make all of the components, they assemble the modules, and then they actually, some of them install those modules through engineering firms all in China. And then they create overcapacity and sell that all over the world. Because they can do that because they've created overcapacity. Did they create too much capacity? Yes, they almost killed themselves. But the reality is that party's over. And what we're seeing now, in particular in Europe, which was the freest, most open solar market in the world, the price per kilowatt 10 years ago, let's call it dimes, let's say 50 cents 10 years ago per kilowatt on a capex basis, got down to 7 to 8 cents. And now it's firm. For the first time in 2 years of inventory dump, the inventory's dumped. And the reason it's dumped is because China had a 30% subsidy from the federal government to these major producers. And that's going to 10. And it was called an R&D subsidy. That's how they got around the non-competitive, global non-competitive bodies. No, it's an R&D subsidy because we're the leading guys in the world and we have to put money into R&D and we're rewarding our companies for being the leading companies in the world. Makes sense. But the reality is they were financing losses. And so these companies were all losing money, but they were getting a kickback from the central government in order to do that, build scale that was beyond what they needed in China to dominate the global market. China now dominates the global solar market. Hence why everybody's raising tariffs and raising content rules. But it's going to look just like the OEM auto market where all of a sudden Toyota started building, a fabrication plant or a manufacturing plant in Tennessee. I think that was the first place they built one, or Kentucky, right? When the rest of the world went, hey, Japanese cars are too cheap. They're vertically integrated and we can't compete. And then they started dumping those cars all over the world and everybody got mad who was selling those cars, for instance, in Europe or the United States or anywhere else. And so they put up barriers. So what did the Japanese do? They jumped over the barrier and started building cars in the domestic market. China will do the same. But you lose your China advantage when you jump into the market. You're now just a domestic player dealing with domestic labor costs, domestic capex, domestic variables. So the Chinese won't jump into some market because they know they won't be able to compete with a domestic player the way they traditionally do, but they will jump into other markets that look more like vertically integrated markets. So from that perspective, that's the model that we have copied. So just unlike Elon Musk, we didn't come up with an original business model because he says he did. We copied one. But it's one that works in China. It works in India if it's not corrupted. And it works in Brazil. And we know it'll work in Brazil because we've done all the numbers. So subject to financing this business plan, we will have one of those vertically integrated entities inside of Brazil. 200 million people, one of the largest economies in the world, one of the biggest countries in the world, one of the cheapest countries to do business.
Roughly, at least for the first half of the year, how will the news flow look like?
Our news goes in waves. I don't know if you've noticed that. It's like a wave breaking on the beach, right? It's out there and you got your board and you're waiting for it. It's like, it's fluff, fluff, fluff. And then all of a sudden the big wave comes and then it's boom, 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 boom. So our news goes like that, and it's not constructed that way. It's not like we have some devious little plan to do that. It's just kind of the way it works. And I think it's sort of centralized around the fact that we're always working on multiple projects within the vertical at the same time. And they start to come together at the same time. They start to come to fruition at the same time. So there will be a lot of news over the next while related to the other end of the vertical, the sort of Halocell, as we call it, end of the vertical. I don't like using that name anymore. I like the name, but that's Homerun Energy now. We bought it. So the Homerun Energy side of the business. And if you look at the deck that Tyler had produced that's on our website. I suggest if you haven't seen it, go download it. It has most of this interview in there in detail. That deck actually breaks the company now down into two companies within the vertical, which is, the materials company and the technology company. So a lot of the news over the next 24 months will be related to the technology company, not the materials company. The materials news will obviously be the processing plant and the solar glass plant, because in my mind, solar glass is just an advanced material using silica.
Where do you envision Homerun Resources in 2 years from now?
Firing on all cylinders is the best I can describe it. Yeah. Everything in place, all 6 profit centers in revenue, all 6 profit centers driving solid margins to an average of, let's call it 30 to 40%. And a company that is getting analyst, and market recognition for what we said we would build and what we will have built. So I think the next 12 months will be a significant transition in the visual and the optics of the company. And first year everyone wanted us to be a resource company. No offense, last year everyone was confused. I think in the third year, everyone will kind of figure it out. And when they do, they'll realize that there's a ginormity of value percolating under the surface here that we're not getting credit for. But I understand that. The market has to understand what you're building. And we've tried to do that, but it's a complicated story. And I think that's the biggest thing that'll happen this year that we're in right now, 2025. Obviously, first revenues, identifying first revenues within the vertical, which is the important thing. Once we're in revenue as a big company, then everyone takes everything more seriously. It's sort of like you're not a teenager anymore, you're an adult. And so from that perspective, we'll be an adult this year. And then next year we'll be a mature adult, one that knows what they're doing and firing on all cylinders. Once that solar plant comes online with that margin and that volume, into that marketplace, that's a transitioning thing, but don't be fooled into thinking that that's just a switch going on and a stock moving in a single movement. That'll be something that happens over time. I like to refer to the Lassonde curve, but in the distinction between our company and a traditional Lassonde company is a traditional Lassonde curve company is a resource company. So what happens is, exploration, excitement, retail, retail's a motive. They either love a deal or they hate a deal. There's nothing in between. And then you sell off, the haters sell. And then what happens is you flatline because you're going through all the boring stuff that we have to go through and did go through. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, bankable feasibility study. Whoa, financing. Whoa, production. But we don't stop there. Because on the Lassonde curve, you'll notice it flatlines. Because what happens is that copper plant has 1 million pounds of copper a year in throughput. But that's it. So the only thing that changes the price of the company is a change in the multiple, which rarely happens, as we know, in the materials space, or a change in the price of the commodity, or a change in the cost of goods sold. There's 3 variables, right? And so that's what changes the price. Outside the control, other than increased capacity, outside the control of the company. That's why the Lassonde curve goes flat, boom, flat. We don't do the last flat because we just keep scaling. 6 profit centers, growing. So our scale is theoretically unlimited to the context of the size of each of those 6 markets. It's not limited by the throughput of the business. It's limited by the size of those 6 markets. And if you identify our 6 markets, they're all high CAGR markets. Silica as a technology input in the energy transition. Solar glass in the winner in the energy transition from a generative perspective. Energy storage. The requirement for a hybrid solution that functions in the energy transition. Solutions built around that, like unlimited capacity relative to selling those into already installed industrial plant and to be built industrial plant. And then recurring revenue off of that every month that makes, that's the dream that makes Apple worth what it's worth. So from that perspective, that's the last year in your cycle. That's 2027 when people realize we're not going to cap out on the Lassonde curve. We're just going to keep going. Then I'm done. Then I'll be chairman and I'll get to take a vacation and just swat mosquito.